Imagine a dusty Oklahoma porch in 1932, where 5 souls survived a week on just 37 cents. Necessity, not wit, filled their plates with humble scraps that might shock a modern shopper today. Thin potato peel broth and heavy lard sandwiches made a simple pot of beans feel like a feast. Yet those sparse tables held a secret. Those desperate bites often tasted like pure, unadulterated heaven. Empty bellies seasoned every mouthful perfectly. Over 2 million folks suddenly found themselves craving number 17. Prosperous lives shattered after 1929, making the heavy cheap comfort of number 8 a true lifesaver. It cost so little that Hoover's men served it to school kids, leading us to the ultimate survival dish. This forgotten staple nourished an entire generation, though most young people today have never even smelled it. You won't find these meals in shiny cookbooks. They were penciled onto scrap paper by flickering candlelight. Desperate mothers scribbled on old envelopes, performing daily miracles to keep their little ones from crying tonight. These tiny faded scraps aren't just recipes. They are echoes of a resilience that defines the American spirit. Subscribe now to join our journey, because the wisdom of these resilient souls outweighs any modern meal kit. Forget fancy delivery boxes and travel back to discover the 30 most enduring forgotten tastes of our past. Number 30 features the yellow-topped dandelion, a common yardweed that suddenly became a precious peppery lunch. Southern children wandered through sun-drenched fields, filling crinkling paper bags with tender wild greens for the evening meal. Searing bacon fat and sharp apple cider vinegar transformed those bitter spring leaves into a smoky, savory delight. This free feast was a lesson in survival, as mothers whispered ancient secrets of the earth to daughters. What was once a desperate hand-me-down secret now sells for $14 as a trendy high-end appetizer. Chefs call it foraged, but Grandma called it survival. Next, at 29, the humble steaming cornmeal mush. Watch the golden meal bubble in salted water until it thickens into a heavy, comforting warmth for supper. A single shimmering spoonful of bacon fat melted over 8-cent cornmeal, feeding a whole family for days. In 1934, those pennies bought 3 nights of peace. By dawn, the leftovers became a new treasure. Cold slices hit hot lard sizzling until they turned golden and crisp, a perfect example of wasting absolutely nothing. Tennessee whispers echo a quiet acceptance. Children ate their mush in silence, understanding the weight of the times. Coming in at 28, cheap salt pork provided a fatty, salty punch that lasted for many long weeks. The heavy cast-iron skillet hissed as thin slices crisped, filling every room with a rich, salty aroma. That mouth-watering scent promised a feast, while the leftover grease waited to become a thick, creamy morning gravy. Every drop of fat was liquid gold flavoring beans and tomorrow's bread in a kitchen where everything worked. Finding a slab in the smokehouse was a blessing. At 27, we encounter the complex wild poke salad. Be careful, Grandma knew these toxic leaves required a ritual of fire and water to make them safe. Southern families mastered the dance of boiling and draining, stripping away the poison to find the hidden nourishment. After a second boil, they sizzled with onions and pork, transforming into something remarkably like buttered garden spinach. An Alabama native called it spinach with a story. This resilient weed flourished in the forgotten roadside ditches. When the wallet was empty, the overgrown fence row became a free market for those who knew where. Wisdom guided the harvest. Number 26 is a simple steaming bowl of potato and onion soup. A dash of flour and salt turned plain water into a thick, heartwarming staple served almost every night. From the mountains to the delta, 19-cent bags of potatoes held families together during the darkest, hardest years. These humble tubers were the bedrock of survival, providing the necessary strength when the pantry was finally bare. Foggy steam rose from tin bowls, offering a pale but precious warmth against the biting chill of life. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, at 25 soft mashed beans were being spread onto thick homemade bread. This hearty, warm spread fueled millions of hungry school kids as they faced a world that felt broken. For less than 1 penny, these sandwiches gave children the strength to grow when everything else was shrinking. Kansas teachers watched as kids unwrapped sandwiches so heavy and damp they seemed to sag under their weight. Soggy bread mattered little to those who had a meal, unlike the silent classmates who watched with empty hands. Those hungry eyes remind us of our blessings. Number 24 brings the comforting tang of tomato gravy and biscuits. Sizzling lard meets golden flour. In 1935, kitchens became spaces of art, whisking hope into a humble tomato sauce, stirring until it glows deep, rust red, seasoned simply. Imagine that warm, heavy ladle pouring comfort over those plain, humble biscuits made from the barest staples. A single 9-cent can of tomatoes was a luxury back then. 15 cents fed 6 hungry souls until they felt full. It was the magic of making a feast out of thin air, tasting of abundance when there was none. 23 American Egg Drop Soup, a story of survival. No fancy restaurant garnish here, just the bite of poverty. Picture a pot of salted water boiling on a stove. A lone egg cracks spinning into the heat. Perhaps you had a limp celery stalk or a wilted carrot. See those white wisps dancing in the steam, adding protein and richness to what was mostly just hot water. When eggs were precious jewels, one was stretched to feed 3. Subscribe to hear more of these forgotten flavors. Some called it sick soup, others just called it dinner. 22. The salty soul of the South grits with pot liquor. Down south, that dark, salty essence was never wasted. It was the liquid gold remaining after greens had simmered low. It breathed with the earthy soul of vegetables cooked down. Poured over plain white grits, it transformed the bowl into a meal that felt like a warm embrace. In 1934, rural families leaned on this flavor constantly. This humble liquid appeared 5 times weekly in the hardest-hit counties. Do you remember your grandparents' stories about the past? This wasn't just hunger. It was a deep wisdom that those who threw away the water never had to learn. 21. The sound of tearing bread. Cold milk splashes over it, seasoned with a tiny sprinkle of white sugar. That was the entire world when the cupboards were bare. A 7-cent loaf of bread was a quiet savior then. In 1933, the leftover heels and half a cup of milk were enough for 2 to survive another night. Mothers sometimes warmed the milk to soften the blow. It was cheap filling, and always there, which meant everything. But history books often hide the bitter truth. During the darkest years from 1932 to 1934, the government paid farmers to bury food while people starved. Millions of hogs were slaughtered and simply thrown away. Rich crops were plowed back into the dirt. Fruit turned to mush on branches because picking it cost too much. While city lines for soup wrapped around blocks, children fainted. Please like this video to keep these histories alive. Imagine a government burying meat while telling you to eat beans. Some families never forgot that cold, hard betrayal. You can taste that lingering anger in the recipes. 20. Hoover Stew. The steam rises from a pot of canned goods, canned tomatoes, corn and beans tumbling together with macaroni. It simmered into a thick, heavy silence born of an insult. Yet it kept hundreds of thousands alive in the shanty towns blooming outside every major city during the Great Depression. In those early years, a single fire could feed an entire camp. It was a community forged in one iron pot, using scraps from back doors, and charity former middle-class families found themselves waiting in line by 1932. They ate from tin plates with bent forks, a memory that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. 19. The sharp snap of soda crackers. A nickel bought a whole sleeve to crumble into a bowl of milk. It turned into a heavy paste that offered no joy, only a bulk that finally silenced a crying stomach. Families who lost everything in the crash found themselves here. If you enjoy these stories, leave a comment below. They told their little ones it was a special treat. The Federal Writers Project recorded these quiet, heartbreaking lies. It was the recurring theme for city folks who had nothing left. A meal that was a simple, dignified humiliation. 18. Navy bean soup, the scent of slow, simmering legumes. 7 cents bought a pound of hope in 1934. After a long soak, they bubbled for hours with a borrowed bone. The butcher's small kindness meant the world then. Sometimes it was just salt and half an onion. This soup became the great equalizer for a broken nation. It graced tables in every state from the poorest shack to the Senate. In fact, it's been served there daily. Since 1903, senators have eaten it for tradition, but millions of families ate it for their lives. These two worlds exist side by side in our history, a tension that never truly finds its way to peace. 17. Milk toast, the smell of charred bread softened by warm milk. Just a pinch of salt for flavor. This was the meal for the weary and the sick, a gentle supper for children who were feeling unwell. When there was nothing else, the milk turned hard bread into something soft and yielding like a mother's hand. Families who once knew the taste of plenty found themselves grateful for this pale, quiet bowl of milk. Parents fed lukewarm milk toast to shivering children, in drafty rooms nursing a deep, quiet heartbreak. This soggy meal was a bitter reminder of the Great Depression's cruelty toward those with nothing left. At number 16, Vinegar Pie offered a custard without eggs, butter, or fruit for those caught by surprise. Ozark mothers transformed water sugar and a splash of vinegar into a humble miracle tucked inside a crust. It set into a wobbly, tangy slice that tasted like luxury when the world felt entirely empty. You can still hear the quiet scrape of forks as children savored that sweet, acidic tremble of hope. For under 10 cents, it wasn't a lie about lemon. It was a truth about surviving with grace. It was an insistence that even in the darkest years, a family Sunday still deserved a small celebration. Number 15 is a crisp act of pride disguised as a dish, the fried green tomato. Before the frost bit the garden, families gathered every unripened fruit and dusted them in golden cornmeal. At 3 or 4 cents a pound, these tart, sizzling slices were the backbone of a struggling kitchen. They emerged hot and starchy, offering a perfect balance of sour juice and a salty cornmeal crunch. Success lived in the cook's steady hand, not too thick, with just enough heat to sear the crust. If you're enjoying these stories, subscribe now. Mothers passed this technique down like a secret family fortune. This kitchen wisdom was a wealth that no bank could seize, a legacy kept in their own hands. At number 14, see how desperation turned crackers into a spiced golden miracle of pure genius. Boil sugar, lemon, and cream of tartar into syrup, pouring it over Ritz crackers to soften them. Once baked with cinnamon and butter, the result somehow captures the very soul of a fresh apple pie. The tart syrup plays a trick on the tongue, turning pantry staples into something orchard fresh and sweet. Nabisco put the secret on every box, offering a taste of joy to those who couldn't afford fruit. Many families around a holiday table grew to love this clever imitation, even more than the real thing. Historians often debate if these recipes were born only of hunger or from a form of edible art. When the pantries went bare, a generation of cooks was forced to become accidental kitchen scientists. They mastered the dance of fat and flame, understanding their ingredients with a depth we rarely see today. In quiet kitchens, women without degrees mastered the chemistry of acid and starch to keep children fed. They solved complex culinary riddles while facing a cold stove. Then, finally, the long darkness ended. Prosperity returned, and we buried that hard-won wisdom to hide the lingering memory of our old shame. Smell the deep dark cocoa of a cake made without a single egg or pat of butter. You whisk the dry goods in the pan and carve 3 small wells into the dark powder. Add vinegar, vanilla, and oil. Then let cold water transform it all into a rich velvety batter. Bake at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. Leave a comment if you've tried this. It cost next to nothing and relied only on what could stay tucked on a shelf indefinitely. This government-tested miracle worked so perfectly that it refused to fade away when the good times returned. We still bake this extraordinary cake today, a lingering ghost of a time we made something from nothing. Number 12 brings us a broth of discarded skins that you won't believe until you taste it. After the potatoes were gone, the peels went into a pot with an onion and some fat. It was a thin, sweet liquid, carrying the humble, earthy strength of the soil in every spoonful. That warmth was just enough to quiet a rumbling stomach and buy a family one more night. In 1932, this wasn't just a recipe. It was a stubborn refusal to be broken. These scraps were the thin line standing between a family and the breadline's cold, hungry shadows. Number 11 is the cooling contrast of buttermilk and hot cornbread. Subscribe for more food history. It is a beautiful harmony of sour chill, meeting the soft, gritty warmth of the country grain. In the hills of Kentucky, this tangy, dense mixture was the ultimate evening comfort for tired families. When the summer sun was relentless, this was a supper that required only a hot oven and time. In a world without ice or coins, that cold glass was a small, refreshing mercy under the stars. Cold, crumbly gold on a chipped plate wasn't hardship. It was the quiet grace of a family cherishing every last crumb. Grandfathers still fire up heavy iron skillets on humid July nights, chasing a flavor that time simply cannot erase. 10. Mulligan Stew. Whether called hobo or jungle broth, the bubbling pot whispered the same story to every hungry traveler. No written rules existed. Men leaping off freight trains simply tossed their meager findings into one shared steaming iron kettle. 1 dusty potato, some pearled barley, or a jagged tin of red tomatoes joined a bone scavenged from a kitchen door. Flames danced in vacant lots from coast to coast. Give what you have. Take only what you need to survive tonight. Through years of wandering, that warm vapor was the only true home, where a stranger was always greeted as a brother. 9. Chipped beef. Soldiers gave this salty mess a vulgar nickname that still makes old veterans chuckle into their coffee. Mothers served it atop charred bread in crowded boarding houses, masking the thinness of the milk with a heavy sprinkle of salt. Diners served this plate throughout the 30s. If you love these stories, please subscribe to our channel. Salty, paper-thin ribbons of beef swirled into a thick flour gravy before drowning a simple slice of toasted white bread. Pennies bought the beef and milk, yet the finished plate carried a savory depth that defied its basement-bottom price tag. That concentrated saltiness filled hollow bellies, providing a lingering warmth that stayed with a man long after the sun went down. Listen closely. For many black families in the sun-baked South, the Great Crash was merely a continuation of a long struggle. Sharecroppers toiled on soil they could never own, facing a bitter winter of the soul years before the rest of America. Trading, sweat for credit at the company store. They mastered the art of survival long before the stock market ever tumbled. Bitter poke salad and smoky fatback sustained them. This culture of wasting nothing was born long before 1929 arrived. Textbooks often credit the crash for these recipes, yet they ignore the resilient souls who were already cooking with thin air. Their hunger wasn't a sudden crisis, but a lived reality. Same pots, same ingredients, but a much older, deeper story. 8. Pinto Beans. 5 cents bought a pound of dried stones that transformed into a feast for an entire starving family. Simmered for 6 hours, with smoky pork served beside a thick, crunchy wedge of cornbread pulled straight from a hot skillet. That rich brown broth was liquid gold in the mountains. This pairing became the very heartbeat of Southern survival and strength. This wasn't an accompaniment or an appetizer. It was the whole world served in a chipped ceramic bowl. Lunch flowed into dinner from one single pot. With every sunset, the flavors deepened, turning humble beans into a gourmet memory. The liquid turned to velvet, as the salt pork surrendered its essence to the slow, steady rhythm of the kitchen fire. A perfect pot felt sacred. It was a quiet promise whispered in the steam that we would all make it through. 7. Lard Sandwiches. Imagine white bread slicked with cold, rendered fat, and a tiny, precious dusting of coarse white salt. This meager lunch hid inside rusted metal pails from the Midwest to the South during those most desperate, leanest American years. Cheaper than butter, and heartier than hope. One white spoonful provided the fuel needed to keep a growing child moving forward. More than mere food, it was a lesson. School children carrying these heavy sandwiches learned the weight of pride at a young age. They hid their lunches from those with butter. Poverty had a cruel math that every child solved before learning their ABCs. Silence filled the house, but the meaning was clear. You finished every bite because your mother's love was in that grease. Her early morning struggle gave you strength. 6. Forget the morning oats you know. This was a savory, heavy evening meal. This salted evening porridge was crowned with a shimmering dollop of whatever bacon grease remained in the kitchen. Families shared this 5-cent supper in 1933. Tell us your family's survival meal in the comments below. Every penny spent bought hours of energy. Occasionally, a lucky child found a lacy-edged fried egg perched atop their gray bowl. Pungent, dried onions transformed the grain into something savory, miles away from the sweet morning bowls we imagine today. Across the frozen plains, children accepted evening oats as naturally as the sunrise, never dreaming food could be anything more. When the same blackened pot held every single answer to your hunger, you eventually stopped asking what time it was. Definitions of time vanished. 5. Bread pudding. A sweet, boozy embrace that turned hard, stale crusts into a soft, golden dream. Rock-hard bread soaked in milk and sugar punctuated by the occasional sweet snap of a raisin, then baked to pillowy gold. Emerging hot from the oven, this was how New Orleans boarding houses performed alchemy, turning yesterday's waste into tonight's treasure. A silk pour of buttery whiskey sauce signaled that the work was done. Even in hard times, there was room for joy. 10 people feasted for 20 cents. It was the taste of a Saturday night when the world felt just a bit kinder. Those mastering this pudding were legends praised for their healing hands, just as we might praise a gifted, brilliant surgeon. 4th, potato and onion pie. Sizzling, lard-sliced roots and pepper layering a heavy cast-iron skillet. A meatless masterpiece for weary souls. A rustic flour and lard crust covers the top, baking slowly. until it glows a deep, warm golden brown under the flame. Beneath, the potatoes soften into a sweet mash. This humble dish was a Sunday feast when the Dust Bowl winds howled outside. Cattle had vanished, leaving only a few staples like onions, flour, and lard to ward off the hunger of the Great Depression. Tucking that crust in meant love, and those caramelized onions offered a rare, genuine comfort that felt like a quiet, warm hug. It almost made you forget the empty pantry. Third is Depression soup, a thin broth born from the desperation of the poorhouse. Steam rises from boiling water, holding scraps of cabbage and turnips. Please subscribe to our channel for more forgotten American food stories. A single heel of salty fatback seasons the pot, simmering for 2 hours until every vegetable surrenders its essence to the liquid. Swirling flour into cold water thickens the soup. This was no gourmet recipe. It was a desperate method of staying alive daily. Families adjusted with whatever they found. Across America, this nameless stew went by 100 titles, yet tasted like the same struggle. Every kitchen, regardless of heritage, shared this instinct. Mothers everywhere were fighting the same silent battle against the ticking clock of hunger. Nothing was wasted then. Now, grandkids pay $12 for artisan soup, never knowing the true bitter cost of their survival. We miss the hidden history. Second is salt pork and gravy over biscuits, the fuel that built the American working-class soul. Here the salt pork pop in the pan, rendering its fat until the edges turn into crunchy golden ribbons of intense flavor. Whisking flour into the hot drippings creates a rich roux. Add milk, stirring until a thick, creamy velvet coats the heavy spoon. Pour that marbled gravy over warm, split lard biscuits. It is a hearty landscape of white and brown, smelling of home comforts. From the South to the Midwest, this was the lifeblood of tenant farmers. It was the only constant in a changing world. There were no other choices. Eaten 3 times weekly, these cheap biscuits were the only things keeping the shadows at a distance. A few cents of pork provided the strength needed for a full day of back-breaking labor under the unforgiving hot summer sun. Wives mastered the roux by sight alone, a silent expert dance of heat and flour performed in a kitchen smelling of smoke. This was true culinary mastery. Finally, we reach number 1, just beans. Don't forget to like and comment on your favorite childhood memories. Simply beans. No fancy tricks here, just dried pulses soaking in a pot overnight, waiting to be transformed by fire and water. Simmered low and served plain. Whether navy beans or pintos, they fueled Appalachia and the South through the darkest, coldest nights imaginable. Names changed, but the mission was the same: survive. In 1933, families ate these for 21 days straight without any complaint. Those who lived through it kept their cupboards full forever. The fear of an empty shelf never truly left their weary hearts. That bubbling pot was a victory song. It was physical proof that despite the world's weight, your family was still standing tall. These 30 dishes were love letters to survival, penned in the tired handwriting of mothers who refused to let hope die out. They wasted nothing. We only forgot their wisdom because our lives became too easy, too full of things we do not need. Yet, that spirit lingers in old cast iron and handwritten cards. It waits in the shadows, reminding us of who we are